All right, so let's go on to what was uncovered in this Washington Post report. Yesterday, we had received reports of the potential use of white phosphorus in this conflict by Israel in a number of places. They have now confirmed, put this up on the screen, that Israel used U.S.-supplied white phosphorus, and the place that they confirmed it was in an attack in Lebanon. So this is a civil rights group is saying this should be investigated as a war crime. Now, to give you some of the details here, there are circumstances where white phosphorus can be used in warfare, but it cannot be used against a civilian population. It's supposed to be used as like a smokescreen, effectively, where it's not going to injure civilians. What they found were the remnants of artillery rounds fired into a Lebanese town near the border of Israel, which incinerated at least 4 homes. The rounds, which eject felt wedges saturated with white phosphorus that burns at high temperatures, produce billowing smoke to obscure troop movements as they fall haphazardly over a wide area. The contents can stick to the skin, causing potentially fatal burns and respiratory damage. Its use near civilian areas can be prohibited under international humanitarian law. What they track here in talking to residents as well is that Israel shelled the hell out of this town for hours and hours, trapping people in their homes until they could escape the next morning around 7 a.m. Residents refer to that attack as the Black Night. These chemicals, if they're left in the body, can damage internal organs, sometimes fatally. And they also go on to say, which I think is noteworthy, unclear why the Israeli military would use these rounds at night, because it's already dark. So if it's supposed to be some sort of a smokescreen, you're not accomplishing anything. Residents speculate that the phosphorus was meant to displace them from the village and to clear the way for future Israeli military activity in the area. So again, these are U.S.-supplied white phosphorus used against civilians in Lebanon. This is something that our own officials have been asked about and sort of deflected and denied. Now confirmed. This had already been investigated by a number of human rights groups, now confirmed by the Washington Post.
Yeah, the Biden administration also now under scrutiny for this. Let's go and put this up there on the screen, because they actually used an emergency declaration. This is another interesting little bureaucratic thing, which shows you the immense power of the executive and what we really should all be trying to rein in. The Biden administration invoked a power that they have as the executive to send military arms if the United States remains under imminent national security threat. So remember, that is what they invoked to supply tank shells to Israel. All they have to do is give a notification to Congress to bypass the official arms sales. These are ones that they could use on Ukraine. Theoretically, they could use it anywhere around the world. Of course, they get away with it because most people in Congress just support it, or they support it enough not to do anything about it. And Krystal, this really aligns with the fact that the Biden administration here is caught in a position where they both, out of one side of their mouth, like just yesterday, John Kirby is like, well, we're very concerned anytime somebody uses white phosphorus that we provide to them. And at the same time is using emergency national security law, which is created to protect American citizens, as one where we can supply tank ammunition to Israel. It also just raises a question to me. Do the Israelis actually need this tank ammunition, or is this symbolic? Both are pretty bad for Israel. One is you've only been fighting for 2 months. You've only been fighting for 2 months and you need tank ammo from the big bad America? What have you guys been doing? You know, one of the things that they like to brag about is how they are self-sufficient in a way, and that they're like, well, we've used your arms to either purchase more from you or your money. We've invested in our own defense supply chain. We're the leaders in military technology. You can't even fight 2 months in an urban combat situation. You already need tank ammo. We're already supplying Ukraine. It's like, well, what's happening here? You've been basically a nation at war for your entire existence for the last 75 years. So that's one. Number two here also is about the way that the administration can basically just bypass the will of the democratic American people through Congress, which is supposed to have all power whenever it comes to war, to just supply basically whatever they want to any longstanding U.S. ally, which I think is crazy. I think if this is going to happen, I think that Congress should and have had to have voted for it. It does, though, demonstrate how the difficult bind I think that the Biden administration finds himself in, where they're both, I believe President Biden at a Christmas party, a Hanukkah party yesterday, said, quote, I am a Zionist. So he's like standing strongly with Israel, but then also is caught not only with his base, but I think increasingly with the international community, especially with especially with the hypocrisy around Ukraine, and we went back and looked, of course, the Ukrainians, whenever the Russians used white phosphorus on them, they're like, this is a war crime, this is horrible, this is evidence that they're trying to take us out. They try to cover up that they use white phosphorus too. Then, I remember also, I covered a lot of this at the time, during the Syrian civil war, the Russians would use white phosphorus against civilians, which is horrible. But that Obama, Biden, and all these people had a lot to say about that at the time, and now we're the ones who are providing the white phosphorus. It's like, what are we doing here?
Right.
Yeah.
And get this. So first of all, what Kirby said in response to this, he's an NSC spokesperson. We've seen the reports, certainly concerned about that. We'll be asking questions to try to learn a little bit more. Okay. Imagine if the report was about Russia, how they would be reacting to the use of white phosphorus against civilians in a way that appears to violate international law. That's number one. Number two, what that Guardian article details is not only did they bypass Congress in terms of these tank munitions, but they also cite unnamed officials as admitting that in Israel's case, the U.S. is not even following guidelines that Biden himself established in February that require all arms transfers to foreign governments to be subject to rigorous and continual examination of the recipient's record on the Geneva Conventions and other global norms for conducting warfare. We have provisions in place that are supposed to make sure any weapon sales that go through, any arms transfers that occur, that these things are not being used against civilians. Why this report matters so much outside of the horror of what is being done to these civilians. These are U.S. supplied white phosphorus being used, credible reports being used against civilians in a way that is tantamount to a war crime. And when it comes to Israel, we're not going to look, we're not going to investigate, we're going to pretend this is not going to going on. We'll do a little bit of hand-wringing, we're a little bit concerned, maybe we'll ask some questions about it. That's it. All of the normal protocols that are typically in place, which are already probably too weak as it is, those are out the window when it comes to Israel. And I'm reminded of the fact early on in this conflict, you had a State Department official, Josh Paul, who resigned over the fact that they were giving Israel carte blanche and completely circumventing all of the normal checks and procedures in terms of arms transfers. Let's take a listen to what he had to say to Christiane Amanpour.
What was so different that made you resign publicly?
Well, in all the arms transfers I've been a part of discussing before, including to Israel, there has always been space for discussion and debate. You can raise concerns about how are these arms going to be used. Do we have confidence that laws of war, laws of proportionality are going to be respected? Do we have concerns about some of the units that these arms might be going to and their track records? What was different here was that there was no discussion. There was no space for that discussion. There was simply an approach of essentially the barn doors are open, and that remains the case. The Wall Street Journal reported just in the last couple of days that America has transferred over 4,000 dumb bombs to Israel, several thousand guidance kits, and 45,000 artillery shells. So the barn doors remain open, and while I'm certainly encouraged to hear what Vice President Harris said, what Secretary Austin has said, for as long as those barn doors remain open, I don't know why Israel would take those warnings seriously.
So he's right. I don't know why Israel would take those warnings seriously either. So keep in mind, as we're watching this devastation unfold in northern Gaza and now move to southern Gaza, the huge civilian toll, the children who have been killed, all of that, it's 22,000 U.S.-made bombs that have been dropped on this population in an incredibly short period of time. Do you think that any of the Biden administration's little, we're going to ask some tough questions and leak into the press, you think anyone in the world believes that? Believes they actually care? No. We are directly complicit in everything the Israelis are doing on the ground in Gaza.
That's another question I raised for Israel, which is from a strategic point of view, why would you want to put yourself in this position to be wholly reliant on us to resupply you? That's an incredible choke point. I mean, this again raises something that they brag all the time about how they have they've well prepared, about their military, about how strong they are. And from what I can tell, basically on this, they're relying on us not only to resupply their tanks, but basically all of their precision-guided munitions are sold to them by the U.S. They don't even have a domestic, they don't have the same level of domestic arms that they have once bragged about. This puts them in a position, too, where you're basically reliant on us and our domestic political whims as as to whether you're going to get it. And you might get it now, but what about 5 years from now, whenever you're going to need it? This raises only, once again, the some of the excellent points made in that Nation article about their own, basically they have destroyed the bipartisan consensus on Israel. It may not feel that way, but the process began during the Iran deal. I think today is a genuine breaking point for a huge portion of the American public. 10 years from now, the next Gaza war or the next whatever war that they find themselves in, it's not going to be even close to the same.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine it's a new generation of Democratic lawmakers, and then you've got millennials and people who are our age and younger who are aging into their 40s and their 50s. These are well-established, tax-paying adults who usually vote a lot. A lot of the boomers at that point are either gone or fading off. I mean, that's one of those where it's a totally changed domestic political situation.
And let's also talk about, like, you know, crass, naked political calculations, which is what, you know, the people in this town, what they care about. Very possible Joe Biden loses re-elect because of his unconditional support for Israel. Previously, all of the pressure had been on the other side. But I mean, we talked about yesterday a poll out of Michigan that has him down by 10 points. And a part of that is no doubt attributable to disgust from young people, from Arab Americans, from Muslim Americans, for our complicity in Israeli war crimes and atrocities in Gaza. And you know, the last piece that I wanted to highlight here, just to always keep the focus on the human beings who are trying to live their lives, trying to survive right now under complete siege, is, you know, the bombs are just the beginning of the pain and the heartache. Put this up on the screen. The hunger war has started. This is a report from the AP. A bag of flour now goes for $120 in Gaza. There's a black market for sugar. You can forget about eggs. Thousands of people pounce on aid trucks when they arrive. Crowds ransacked a warehouse where food had piled up before distribution. There's also now mounting reports of illnesses that are running rampant, given the, you know, lack of food, lack of medicine, lack of basic sanitation, lack of sewage. This is, you know, completely predictable. Chaotic scenes, they say, of sickness and filth are unfolding at UN shelters in Rafah, bursting at the seams. The UN Humanitarian Office said Wednesday the poor sanitation had led to rampant cases of scabies, lice, diarrhea, raising fears more serious disease may soon spread. Aid workers have reported outbreaks of the liver disease, hepatitis A, and this is all a direct result of the complete siege that the 2.2 million residents of Gaza have been under since the very beginning days of this war on their
that again,
population.
You know, like we said, day 5, 6, 10, 12 afterwards, 2 months, 3 months. What's that going to look like? What about food? Who's going to foot the bill? Are you now responsible? Who's going to be in charge of distributing it? It's looking more and more like total chaos. There's already reports out of Gaza, Krystal, of full-blown looting. I mean, Somalia, Mogadishu level looting of some of these aid convoys. That leads to what? Warlords who are going to take control, or the IDF is going to take control. I mean, none of this ends up in a good situation.
Yeah.
All of it looks really bad.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.